XCOM clones are a dime a dozen nowadays. Unfortunately, many of them tend to follow the formula too closely without ever deviating or improving upon it. With that said, one of the more ambitious clones was Phoenix Point. Phoenix Point is a 2019 title developed and published by Snapshot Games. Right off the bat, it's important to know that Snapshot Games was founded by Julian Gollop, one of the main lead designers for the original XCOM UFO Defense back in 1994. It's always interesting to see what a veteran of an industry can do with modern technology. With Phoenix Point, no expense was spared, adding many interesting features such as a diplomacy system and a larger emphasis on open-ended gameplay. There's quite a bit to stand out from the standard XCOM clone, but is Phoenix Point worth playing today? So when you start the game, you can choose your difficulty. You can also select the DLC to be activated during your game. For this playthrough, we will pick the standard veteran difficulty with all the DLC activated. My gripe with that is that it's very hard to determine which DLC affects what unless you've done some research beforehand. There are actually a couple of DLCs that the community recommends to have off during your first playthrough, mainly Festering Skies. After playing this game, I agree, but we will get into that why later in this review. For now, we must get through the prologue and the tutorial. The intro cutscene sums up the state of the world and what is going on. The year is 2047. An infection known as the Pandora virus ended up getting into contact with many humans and animals, creating an alien menace that needs to be destroyed. As the player, you control Phoenix Point organization, which aims to bring down the Pandora virus and essentially save humanity. In the prologue, you start out with the tutorial for their tactical battles and how they play out. Basically, your goal in the prologue is to eventually reconquer a deactivated base and bring it back online again. So if you've played modern XCOM or any of its inspirations within the past decade, you'll feel very familiar with how the combat will proceed. However, there are quite a few differences and additions that make the combat far more unique as a result. For one, instead of only one move and action, you have 4 action points. Each action point can be used for either for abilities or for your weapons depending on if you have the correct amount of action points. For example, shooting from a sniper or heavy machine gun will take 3 action points, while a pistol will take 1. This seemingly small change actually changes your approach, as you will need to use your points wisely. Sometimes it'll be better to stand behind full cover and take 2 shots with an assault rifle rather than run and flank for 1. The other major change is the implementation of a free aim system. When you click to attack, you can order your troops to shoot like normally or take direct control of what your characters aim at for their next shot. This brings you down to a first-person perspective where you point and shoot. There's still a chance to miss, but it greatly increases your chance to disable a limb off of an enemy. This is very useful as you can shoot an arm off an alien, rendering its ability to attack you at all. It's amazing stuff and probably the Phoenix's strongest point. If there's one issue with the combat for Phoenix Point, it is the mission structure. While there are your missions where you'll need to kill all the enemies on site, there are also missions where you'll need to secure a resource or gather an item. For many of these, Phoenix Point makes the dumb design decision to keep spawning enemies until you evacuate your troops. This is especially common in the resource missions, which end up taking far longer than necessary to complete. It also doesn't help that each turn drains a point of overall stamina for your troops. Basically, the longer you take on a mission, the bigger the stamina drain will be when you exit the mission. This means that you'll need to go to a base to rest up and recover stamina. Fighting with reduced stamina will lower the amount of action points you have in a mission. Even though this is capped at 10 stamina loss a mission, this is a clear sign of being punished for taking a slower strategic approach. So once the prologue is complete, the game officially begins with you at the Geoscape phase. From here, there really isn't a clear direction on where you're supposed to go. However, it is recommended to go to each of the nodes on the map and explore the locations with your ships. Some of these places will lead to missions, while others are havens usually represented by one of the 3 major factions. 3 factions in this game are the fanatical disciples of Anu, the militaristic New Jericho, and the ecological Synedrian. Each faction has their own ideologies and destiny on how humanity should proceed going forward. Each faction also contains their own tech tree, with you being able to gain it through diplomatic ways or from straight up assaults on their havens. So as mentioned prior, diplomacy plays a major role in Phoenix Point. As you explore the world, your actions can help benefit or harm the various factions. During my playthrough, I mainly sided with the Disciples of Anu by defending their havens from invaders and selecting dialogue options that support their ideals. This led to its own mission chain, which was pretty fun. In all honesty, I actually preferred fighting the other factions rather than the aliens. Instead of the more heroic and cinematic tone of XCOM, Phoenix Point presents a bleak and depressing world, with humanity divided instead of united together. Heck, even Phoenix Point isn't innocent itself as you dig deeper into its lore and find out more about why Phoenix Point fell in the first place. Even as the player myself, I wasn't the most morally right person here, as I often attack New Jericho havens to steal their aircraft and technology along the way. Sure, you can say it's ultimately for the greater good and the end justifies the means, but at what cost? Early on, I was quite surprised just how much time was being spent on the lore and where the world currently is. There are many cutscenes early on getting into the various factions, and even more so on the Pandora virus itself. Unfortunately, the game never really takes full advantage of its setup and ultimately forgets about it in the late game. Even with the initial promise, the story feels more like an afterthought despite the initial setup. Still, I will give respect to the world building itself. Alright, so there's a crap ton more stuff on the Geoscape to go through, but I will do my best to be clear and concise. Phoenix Point follows the old school formula of XCOM by having multiple bases to manage. Instead of having the ability to build bases wherever you want, you'll have fixed points on the map on where the inactive cells are located. These can be reactivated remotely on the globe. If it is not covered in anything, chances are that you are good to go. If it is covered in red fog, then the base will be infected and it will need to be cleared out by your troops. Base building itself is pretty simple, with each section of your base being able to be used to build a facility. Unlike old school XCOM, you do not need to staff your research or fabrication plants, as an AI machine is set to handle those tasks. And now we get into one of my biggest gripes with this game, and that is the research. Research is synonymous with XCOM and really is what elevates the game for me. It is awesome going from a low-level basic equipment to high-powered weapons. Unfortunately, Phoenix Point fails horribly on that front despite the large quantity of research present. Outside of the standard autopsies, there is a crap ton to discover and research, such as each faction's weapons, armor, aircraft, soldier class, and even some unique techs on their own. Unfortunately, none of this really matters, as all of it boils down to variants and side grades to your current equipment. Sure, it is nice to research the aircraft of the factions and manufacture it, but it barely matters as none are improvements from a standard Manicore. Any benefit you get, such as an aircraft with higher capacity, means a detriment such as a reduction in speed. It's basically the same with armor and weapons as well. All this time is dedicated to the factions, and the game is constantly telling the player to get invested in a faction's technology, yet it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Considering the huge potential here, this is such a letdown. Since money is not a factor anymore, Phoenix Point uses a resource system. You have 3 resources to keep track of: tech, basic, and food. Tech and basic resources are used to construct buildings, equipment, vehicles, weapons, armor, and whatever else you need. Food is to recruit soldiers and feed them as time progresses. Resources in Phoenix Point are pretty scarce, so you'll mostly have to gain them from resource missions, as well as trading amongst the havens. Unfortunately, trading cannot be done at the diplomacy screen and must be done by sending a ship to a haven and manually trading. Since each haven has a very limited supply of resources, this game gets very tedious very quickly, as you'll be hopping from one haven to the next to trade. I also mentioned before how the Festering Skies DLC is usually recommended to disable, and that is due to the air combat. This DLC introduces aerial combat to Phoenix Point. The way it works is pretty simple. You engage with the enemy and assign your weapons to attack various modules. The problem comes with the horrible scaling in power. After a while, you'll face ships that are just too strong to attack, and a big behemoth monster that you can't really do anything directly against. Considering how bloated this game can feel with all the features and unnecessary things, this one is also completely unnecessary as an addition that unfortunately does nothing to enhance the experience. It just adds more content for the sake of it, which there is plenty of already. According to HowLongToBeat.com, Phoenix Point is listed to be 35 hours just focusing on the main missions and not engaging in any of the side content or DLC. With the DLC, it balloons up to over 70 hours. While this sounds like a great amount of content, the late game of Phoenix Point just doesn't hold up. It gets very tedious with just how long each encounter takes and the lack of any real meaningful late game tech. One of the biggest marketing points before this game's release are the alien mutations. As you dive deeper into the game, you'll get informed of variants that are developed based on your success. In theory, the Pandorans swap out parts as you take them out throughout the campaign. This is supposed to provide a dynamic challenge the whole way through. For example, one alien you find may swap out a limb for a machine gun in order to provide itself with more range. Like a lot of things about Phoenix Point, It sounds great in theory, unfortunately the execution is nothing special. It's basically just AI that scales to you the better that you do. Regardless of your playstyle, you'll end up with heavily armored aliens that take a crap ton of bullets to go down. Alright, so I'm ready to wrap this up soon, but let's talk about the presentation aspect. Graphically, this game looks pretty good on the Unity engine. The art direction is honestly what excels in this game. Pandoran creatures are based off of Lovecraftian horror, which does a great job being unique to other aliens in media. I wish that I took this a step further to the troop customization, which I found to be very lacking. Outside of a mutation in the priest class, nothing here really encapsulates that Lovecraftian vibe for your soldiers. Audio-wise, the soundtrack is pretty bland with nothing memorable or noteworthy. On launch day, this game was plagued with many bugs and glitches. While many of the major crashes and game-breaking bugs were resolved, there are still several exploits to take advantage of. One infamous one is how the enemies will not go during their turn if you save the game and reload it. Considering how this has been a bug since basically the game's launch, it's surprising that it was never addressed. Performance is also hit and miss. I have a 7900 XTX, and while it does perform fine for the most part, I do have random slowdowns here and there. So after playing for about 40 hours and doing my best to get invested in this world, Phoenix Point is unfortunately a soft pass for me. While the free aim mechanic and the non-linear structure are a huge plus, the game suffers from a major lack of polish. The lack of map variety, lack of meaningful research, and the overall repetitive nature of the game ultimately tarnish the experience more you play. It also doesn't help that the DLCs don't really help to elevate the game, with the Festering Skies DLC being seen as a hindrance. Despite the experience of Julian Gollop, Phoenix Point ultimately bites off way more than it can chew. Funny enough, I would like to see a sequel with a bit more polish this time around, as I do believe there is a great game waiting to be made. This most likely won't be the case, as Snapshot Games is currently under Embracer Group, and they have not released another game since Phoenix Point. Considering all the restructuring Embracer is doing, I wouldn't be surprised if Snapshot Games is next on the chopping block, meaning that the Phoenix may not rise ever again. Thank you all for watching as always, and this is Powerhouse, signing off.